Greetings and welcome to Potentials. This is LIGIA, and today I have the privilege and honor to have the founder of SAALT LLC, of which I am a member, and also Generation Z on YouTube, Patreon, and Instagram and X. Without further ado, I introduce Dave Rossi. How
Thank
are
you
you?
so much. I'm great, Linda. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you wanting to have me on, and it's been a little while that we've been planning this, and we finally got around to it. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Yes, I'm very excited to have you here. So this is awesome. Um, I just wanted to ask you a few little questions and answer how you can or how you would like to. What is SALT and what would you like to accomplish with it?
Sure. So SALT, for those that don't know, stands for Strategic Analysis and Assessment of Longitudinal Technologies, and the objective with that company is to try and give a community-oriented approach to trying to bring out a lot of this suppressed technology and knowledge, whether it has to do with transportation, so propulsion, communication, applications in the medical field. And so right now we are trying to first attain an understanding of what exactly these types of technologies and these concepts entail, and then from there see if we can either build, use resources, network, and essentially bring a lot of what's being discussed to fruition, whether it's being something that is assembled at someone's home or anything of the sort. Someone is looking to open up a laboratory or something to develop some of these concepts in more of a practical R&D approach to put into a prototype mode, and so on and so forth. And so that's essentially what that company is dedicated towards doing, and trying to usher in more of a transparent approach and bring a lot of this, or at least some of it, out from the hands of the military industrial complex.
Yes, thank you. And I want to say I really appreciate that, just, on behalf of a lot of other people as well. But I personally have found you extremely inspiring. Um, and if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be even doing this right now.
I
I wouldn't be doing
appreciate
this
that.
podcast.
Thank you. So I appreciate that. It humbles me very much, and I appreciate that so much. It's very humbling to see that I've inspired anybody else, let alone myself, to be honest. So I appreciate that very extensively.
Well, and not to embarrass you any further, but I'll just tell a little bit about what happened with me and how I even found you. I was just, kind of giving up on things, like just, I tried to have my own business, and I wanted to teach people how to heal themselves, basically. And nobody was really understanding. And I'm not saying it was their fault. Maybe it was just me not being able to explain to people well enough what I was actually trying to do. But at the same rate, I just felt like people weren't getting it, and maybe they just weren't ready for it yet or whatever. So I just sort of lost like hope in a way, for a lot of things. And then I watched your interview with Linda Moulton Howe, and then I saw a few other episodes that you had done as Gen Z, and I just loved the way that you had some hope in your voice, and it just made me feel kind of inspired to, try a little bit more with what I was doing. And I wanted to know how I could heal people and what I could use to do it, even technology wise, even if I couldn't show them how to do it with energy, which is what I was trying to do. So whenever you started having these calls where we could talk to you and figure things out, and you kind of, showed us a few things, just, not nothing like that we couldn't have figured out, but you just sort of helped us along, you know, and I really appreciate that because I don't know. I don't know what I'd be doing right now, to be honest. I really don't. So thank you.
Well,
The end.
again, thank you. Again, it's I just reciprocate that same energy because I'm very humbled and very appreciative and to a large degree speechless. So that's why I don't know what else to say other than thank you a million times over. So it's great. I love the conversations that we do have on the member side of things, and I think it's only getting better and better for those that do attend, and those that attend will know that. So yeah.
Right. Exactly. Well, I had a few other questions here. One was like basically because the name of my show is Potentials. What are potentials, and how does that relate to things like probability? And has probability changed as a result of you know potentials changing as well? Like
Sure.
how are they related? And also, are things more probable now in a positive direction because of things that have happened recently?
I think we're first off, before getting to the potentials thing, I think that what we're seeing is the answer to those two questions are sort of ingrained in the same sort of fundamental concept because the potential for things to get better has arisen in the last handful of years, and I think that we're seeing a lot of that being broken through this old wall that's been up for quite a long time. Now, what that wall is, for example, to give a practical example for people, is the not necessarily of course a legitimate wall, if you will, but the idea or notion that, for example, certain people within various industries of either science or finance or so on and so forth have essentially had a have a system put around them, not all individuals, but a fair amount, particularly the influential ones in their respective rights, have a system of or a group of individuals that are put around them as sort of a uh I guess you could say a transmitter and receiver of what they deem to be is most appropriate or not appropriate for the person that is in that respective field. So what I mean by that is, say you have a very prominent scientist, you'll have a handful of other people that scientist will court or cultivate or accumulate over the course of X amount of weeks, months, or years, as they fluidly lead up to their position of influence, that essentially protect this individual, if you will. I'm hesitant to use the word gatekeep, but protect this individual from, I guess you could say, exposing any of the potential stumblings or loopholes within the system at large that will make people go, wait a minute, I can do that too, or that's all it takes, or what have you. And this is why I had brought this up on our members call a couple of calls ago, as of the time we're recording this. But there's a difference between the me of 5 years ago that watched Steve Jobs say in the 1990s on video, that he said, and I'm paraphrasing, he goes, you realize that you can basically do anything that you want when you come to notice that the people around you and excuse me, the world all around you are made up of people no smarter than yourself. Now, there's a difference between hearing that and actually absorbing it. And so I think one example to bring this full circle and to answer the second question as well is that when we talk about potentials, we have to consider the fact that the name itself gives birth to the potential for anything to occur. Now, this I would apply to more of a finite set of we could say outcomes from a physics perspective, but from other areas of life, I think that it is very expansive and very prominent because th- the me now that is saying that and reinforcing that, if the me of 5 years ago was watching the me of now, the me of 5 years ago would not have understood what the me currently of right now is trying to convey, because I would say to myself, okay, well, sure, the world is made up of people no smarter than you or I, what's the big deal? But it's very much, it seems as though that when we're living within this reality, whether it's physics or whether it's watching television or what have you, it's not so much can you understand what's being said, but can you feel what's being said? And I think that is a translational difference that allows people to wake up quite prominently. And I think that by by bringing this full circle, this answer to both your questions, I think that we're seeing now the way that people go, hold on, I've been doing working a certain job for X amount of years of my life, and I've now just realized that I can do this or I can do that. I think from that perspective, the definition of a potential in a person is equivalent to the same way a potential in a particle could be explained very similarly. And I think that the same way that somebody sees, for example, oh, hold on, I can now do, or I just realized now I can do this with my life or do that with my life and so on. You can notice the same way that a particle will behave when you put a voltage or a potential to it. You'll notice it'll start to oscillate, jump around, get excited, and then jump over to that part of space and time where you've now conditioned it to be in. And so from that perspective, I think that would probably be the most appropriate definition of a potential in a in an arbitrary covering all aspects of the spectrum sense. Now, from a scientific perspective, a potential is a combination of what I just said, but also it allows the possibility for certain particles and certain events to take place, whether it's phase changes, fluctuations, densities, pressures, velocities, momentum, and so on and so forth. And so it's kind of ironic, or unironically ironic, because of the fact that the same way that we describe potentials in the former part of my statement, we can also liken to that of the latter part scientifically, but it seems as though there's again this sort of wall, whether literally or otherwise, that is put up in these various areas of, I don't even want to say industries, but these various fields that seem to again act as suppressors. I know that Eric Weinstein had something called his DISC theory, stands for Distribution Idea Suppression Complex, which proposed not that there's this grand set of individuals that are all in a dark room behind the scenes plotting and scheming against, you know, the masses, although that's certainly up for debate as we see more and more events, you know, seeming to indicate such. It's not necessary. His proposal was there's not necessarily that type of setup, but there is this generalized, loose, wink, wink, nudge, nudge type system that has been put in place by people who have been cultivated and have been viewed as sort of prospects, the same way that sports coaches view, or scouts go looking for athletic players over the years to see who would be most appropriate for their team in the future. I think we see that same type of situation occurring, and we see that this is a very feasible um, setup or method, because we know, for example, that we see certain individuals in the military that have been there for 30, 40, 50 years that know far more than, for example, in America, Congress knows, even though by law, the Congress is supposed to know to a large extent as much, if not more, than the military, even though that's realistically not the case. And so I bring all this up because I think the potential for that to be flipped around is certainly on the rise. And I think that from the perspective of both science, physics, metaphysics, and the merging of both the material and the non-material, and the world of the very small with the world of the very large, I think we're going to see it. We're seeing a convergence of that right now. And I think the potentials literally within the ether themselves are by definition the driving force behind what's enabling that that movement or that pushback against such an oppressive system, if you will. So that's it was kind of a bit of a long answer, but that's my, if I were to give a definition to potentials in that sense, I would probably I would associate the least with the scientific material aspect. I would use that as just a grasp for the extrapolation to then scale up to the other examples. But I would say that it's certainly it's representative in all of life, basically, if that makes sense. And so the same way that you have in empty spaces, we call it, you have the potential to put an object there when you're decorating your home or something like that. It would be the same way in science. It would be the same method or the same approach socially, strategically, intellectually, and psychologically, and so on and so forth. And it could be, it's, as we speak about, it's a dual use system. It could be used for better and it could be used for worse. I think we see a restructuring and a resistance and an uprising of a much more positive set of potentials to occur. And I think we're seeing that right now.
I like to hear that. That's a very hopeful outlook, and I like that. Also, I was wondering, because Jared had asked this question, are potentials like, as in the blinking universe, right? The part where it's dark, when the light isn't blinking. Is that the potential?
I would say that at that point, it's a great question. The potential has actually birthed the possibility for that to even be observed and experienced. So I would say the potential itself is actually even on a metaphysical scale grander than that type of perspective. I would say the potential has already been birthed for that possibility to occur. And so I would even take a further step back, and then whether it's internally or, metaphysically or even scientifically, trying to view things fractally and try and zoom out of even that perspective and say, well, is there a potential that's enabling that to occur? And I think that is probably a more, in my opinion, a more appropriate way to view it relative to a grander structural, archetypal perspective that one could attain for this reality.
Interesting. And I do remember you saying before that we are humans, we are particle accelerators.
Yes, yes, I've done some papers for some various private groups on this, and the idea is that essentially we are particle accelerators that essentially I mean, it's in the name, accelerate particles. And we see that, for example, as a quick thought experiment for your audience, there's other than, and I know someone brought this up to me a while ago, so I'll address it. Putting aside the human senses for a moment, if you walked into a room that was completely white, and basically void and empty, and after you shut the door behind you, even the door disappeared, you would not be able to tell if you were falling or if you were staying still, because there's nothing for you to relate, compare, or there's no a pillar to compare it to compare the movement to, so you don't know if you're moving or not. And so when we start to think of things in that sort of regard, we begin to wonder with ourselves, is it possible that you can go faster than the speed of light through acceleration? And if you go faster than the speed of light, then you would be outside of both space and time. And so this has brought up something that I actually thought of, and I want to thank you for even asking this, because it goes back to this idea that when people see crafts that are moving very, very slowly over, say 1 or 2 or 3 meters over the course of many hours, or you say, why is this craft slowly moving, just a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, but it's been there for, oh man, it's been above my house for 5 hours now, or something of this type. Has it ever occurred to some people that perhaps the occupants inside the craft are actually, from their point of view inside the craft, they are actually scanning like a videotape, forwards and backwards. They are observing and experiencing and watching different points in time that occurred in that particular space. So in other words, this some people may think of looking glass, or they'll say this sounds like chronovisor. Well, you can argue very strongly that's what that is. You could say this is negentropic phase conjugation, very much so. And so the notion is essentially that the craft in this particular case and the occupants inside of it have enabled a system, a warp bubble system, if you will, that has been put around them to allow them to go faster than the speed of light, to break out of the space-time structure that we're used to. Because from our perspective, we're just seeing the craft move a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right over the course of 5-10 hours. But for the people inside the craft, they're seeing everything outside of the craft play out like a holographic movie, because they're skimming through different points in time. And the only way this could technically be done is through the acceleration of particles, at least on the perimeter of the craft. And so this notion that we may be a natural particle accelerators gives thought to the gives potential credence to the idea that there are particles that accelerate from the heartbeat of the earth, or the Schuman resonance, at very high frequencies, and as they get closer to the surface because of distance, they start to really span out and become much more lower in frequency, which would be which would give rise to the Gwen towers that the Air Force has, the ground wave emergency network towers. But the idea essentially that these frequencies are all sort of latched into one another, potentially through this grid, if you will, in the ether, that are accelerating at all these different, that have part of photons and light and electrons and all these different things, and heat, accelerating, decelerating at different rates. Except there have been a handful of cases where certain craft could in fact break that barrier. And it's been alleged that every time we sleep or lucid dream or remote view, we are going outside of space time. And so it would certainly give credence to the fact that if you have particles that can go through the planet and connect to us as almost as if we are natural transducers or transmitters and receivers, the same way that it's been proposed that the ether is a sort of acts as a negative resistor for those that are interested in uh, the electrical engineering side of stuff. I think that we are going outside of space and time every time we lucid dream remote view with practiced and controlled intent. And I think that the particles that accelerate slash travel through us are a miniature version of what is happening on a much more powerful scale inside of craft, for example. Although I will say, to be clear, it is of my opinion that the craft are nuts and bolts versions of what we already are. And so I think that, again, that's why um I think they're the same way that we can go outside of space and time naturally, these craft can do very similar things as well, but just materially.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I really wondered about that because some of those craft are considered to be kind of organic, right? They're not like cars, like the ones we
Well, the
have.
idea is that some craft are organic to the point where the beings themselves, whether they're wherever they're from, other dimensions, other timelines, so on and so forth, uh, they are in fact the craft or an orb of light is uh, a tethered or non-local attachment from them or to them. And then we have other cases where we see very rigid nuts and bolts like craft, which generally I'm not personally a big fan of. Don't get me wrong. I'm not so much I'm speaking more of the alleged occupants more than the craft probably. But anyways, the then we have craft that combine both hardware with organic, say for example, DNA connecting enablements that allow, for example, the craft to only respond when someone with a particular DNA structure or density of consciousness, for lack of a better description, um, gets close to it. So this is where the definitions begin to get very amorphous, very vague, because we don't really have any words for them. So we just, again, the same way that I've talked about how the word quantum is kind of thrown around all over the place, I believe that the word consciousness is as well. I think that there's and it's not, I would love to contribute to it, but I don't know how this would even work. But I believe that there should be some type of expansion of the vernacular and vocabulary regarding consciousness, so that we can better understand a lot of these paths that we're going down in terms of experience and observation and so on. So
I believe that will come. Yeah, it's only a matter of time. But I feel like also as we become more telepathic, and this is just my own, as we become more telepathic, terms and words will not be as important as concepts and images and what you feel intuitively.
very much so. I think psychokinesis or telekinesis is something that's actually part of that particle accelerator concept, that particles are accelerating with qubits or quantum bits of information from our minds or our hearts to another individual, and that individual is receiving that feeling or that message, if you will, either at light speed or faster than light speed. And that speaks to a lot of what even people that you've had on experience or what people who are watching you experience and so on. So I think that there's definitely a lot there, because there's an acceleration of certain energies that go from one person to another, almost as if the energy was already there at the person it was being sent to. And that speaks to, again, non-locality and potentials, enabling the fact that something is there but it's not there simultaneously. And yeah, I think that we have to a certain degree nail down certain labels or definitions that need to be not universally but generally agreed upon, so that we mitigate the amount of translation that is done in these various conversations, so that we can focus on the progress of understanding and moving forward on the concepts theoretically and experimentally, and rather than spending a lot of time translating. Because actually Richard Feynman said this long before I did, which was that basically, and I agree with him, a good chunk of time conversing with someone about concepts, in his case scientific ones, and in my case as well, you end up finding out that anywhere from 40 to 60% of the conversation, if not maybe a little bit more, is spent simply translating the concepts, because we just either label them differently or view them differently, but they're still the same concept. So once that translation has been mitigated or reduced to being something that could be felt and understood far more significantly than heard, is like going back to the Steve Jobs example, then I think we're going to make a lot more progress much more quickly.
Agreed. Definitely. Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that you were planning on sharing some other things that I know nothing about. You're going to surprise me.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things I would like to share for this conversation is something that was brought up on yesterday's group Zoom call, and I would like to thank a handful of individuals, of course, everyone that was there, but I would like to thank Damon and a couple of other and even Kat as well for these for this discussion, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have drawn this. And so, to give everyone an idea for with regards to how craft would generally be operating, is essentially, imagine we have all around us these longitudinal vertical lines that are there in the ether, and they are there. They also have the potential to become observable and interactable, as we just recently discussed from potentials. But we see now this purple circle represents a craft, and again, the rest of the space would be, space-time as we know it. The yellow individual at the bottom there would be at the bottom of would be on, say, the surface of the Earth, and then this red outlined line around the craft, this squiggly oscillating line, would represent the energetic warp bubble that is, say, put around the craft. And what's happening here is essentially the craft, after its initial takeoff, is regardless of where it's coming from or whatnot, is essentially locking in with one of these longitudinal waves. And this green sort of oscillation, caduceus-like movement, represents the ebbing and flowing of the more medium to low frequencies that then get converted into high frequencies as it gets close to the actual physical area of the craft itself, which is why quite often people who are within 10-20 feet, whether it's fighter pilots or people very close to craft right after they take off or during takeoff, get radiation burns, because the high frequencies would be in the X-ray and gamma regime, whereas people that are standing, say, 30-40 feet under a craft could be directly under the craft, and just as we see our drawing here, and there not be an issue. And a lot of people will obviously go, huh, like, what's up there? But the point is that these very high frequencies allow the craft to essentially void both space and time. Now, what's very interesting is that this was drawn out, and what I'm about to show here has a similar visual to what we've been discussing the whole time, really. But we see here that if we look into the Schuman resonance of the Earth itself, we find that we see the same type of squiggly type drawing, because the notion is that from the center of the Earth, every time the Earth beats, there is a frequency that emits that we detect on the surface is, I believe, 7.83 hertz or 7 point something. I don't have it off the top of my head what exactly it is, but the idea is essentially that it is, for example, a very low frequency on the surface, because very much like a Tesla ball, and for those that don't know, I will use this example here for everyone that is, here we go. So very much like a Tesla ball, there's much more of a prominent plasma frequency, density, pressure, all of that at the center compared to the surface. Now, the idea here is that we all have with us a unique connection, a non-local plasma connection, if you will, or plasmonic or plasmoid, or even, for those more technically inclined, Bose-Einstein condensate based, which is lighter than a plasma, allows the sort of one to interact with the quantum glue of the vacuum. The notion is that we are on the surface here, and we all have our own unique connection back to the heartbeat of the Earth, of Mother Earth herself, which explains why astronauts, regardless of what country they come from, have to take these little Schumann resonance boxes up with them, particularly in higher altitude and uh, past that missions because of the fact that they need to be close to, again, something that is a part of them intrinsically, whether they know it consciously or not, which is, again, would be Mother Gaia, if you will, and speaks to the fractality of things and all of that. And so the idea is that we would be smaller versions of the planet. And so when we look at things in that sense, we then begin to wonder, okay, well, is it possible that the craft themselves are using the ionosphere and the energy coming from the mass or the center or the heartbeat of the Earth to then create a smaller version of the Earth and then wrap it around around the occupants inside of it? And so, in other words, many people might be asking, Dave, are you saying craft are smaller fractals of what the Earth is? I would say one can make a strong argument to a very large extent. Yes, very much so. That is essentially something that I know for those on the members side that have been in our group Zoom calls and whatnot have seen this discussed before. I was hoping perhaps to give a different perspective to such, and the idea is that if we view this Tesla ball as well as being a capacitor or having the possibility to be a capacitor, we then wonder if lightning strikes are, again, very similar to like a Van de Graaff generator. When someone puts their hand on the sphere of it and their hair goes up and their hair spikes, one has to wonder if, for example, lightning strikes are when a certain amount of energy is mustered up and gets very close to the Earth itself. In other words, when one capacitor is getting close to another, and then there's this sudden spark of electricity, which is interesting because we see that we've seen photos of and eyewitness accounts of people claiming that craft are using the electric lightning bolts to essentially what seem to be recharge themselves or gain some type of energy or energy density that could not have been mustered up otherwise by the craft on its own. So just something certainly to think about. It's certainly, at least the hope is to bridge to a small extent in this case the world of physics with metaphysics, the material with the non-material. But the idea is that all of this is done very much at the Planck scale. Essentially the Planck scale being the invisible energy field that separates us from the I guess you could say quantum foam, you could say spirit realm, astral realm. I don't claim to know what that, there are many different layers to that, and this goes back to the necessity of needing to have things labeled. But this is just something I wanted to bring up for those that may be interested in how the not just craft operate, but also giving a direct correlation to how we as humans operate. Because as our great friend and member Damon said on last night's Zoom call, he also brought up the fact that the fascia the fascia inside of the human body also seems to be very responsive and in a dielectric sense. And it's interesting because it's of my very strong view that there needs to be dielectric, at the very least, dielectric coating around certain all craft to in order to operate at the level that and spectrum that we're speaking on. So I think that when we look at a lot of this, we'll find that there's going to be a lot of similarities between what's been shown and or not shown rather in occult circles. The definition of the word occult literally means to hide something from the rest, and I think we're going to see a lot of these mystery groups and Gnostic texts and Kabbalah or Kaaba based writings and all of that kind of come full circle, whether it's even the work of Nikola Tesla, to this same concept that we've been discussing this entire time. And it's just a matter of viewing things in a little bit of a different perspective. But to sort of wrap this all up, one can make the argument that whichever window we're looking at here on my browser, whether it's the one that I've drawn of the craft, whether it's the notion of the ionosphere and the Schumann resonance of the planet, or it's a Tesla globe here, we have to wonder if perhaps these are all the same things being expressed in just different terms. And so that's just something that I wanted to share with everybody here and with your lovely audience as well, and with my audience too, specifically with the members. So I want to thank you for letting me kind of throw that out there and just ramble a little bit. So
Well, yeah, I love your rambles, so you don't have to thank me, thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you, and I do appreciate you going into all that detail. Um, one question I had is, Jared was asking me about electricity, and uh, is it the same, like as above, so below? Whenever the electric yeah, the electricity comes down and strikes the earth, does it go into the earth the same way that it comes up?
Well,
Like,
this is where it gets interesting because there's been speculation as to whether electricity, lightning bolts, do they come from the ground? Do they come
yeah,
from the ionosphere? Do they perhaps even, again, going back to the conversation of potentials, is it when there is a potential for capacitor, one capacitor, or we could say uh, density or deposit of energy getting close to the earth as a capacitor, is it possible that at the center point between the two is where the actual bolt begins and we just see the linear appearance of a strike, which seems to, again, depending where you're looking at it from, either come from higher up or come from the planet itself, but when in fact it's really coming from the middle, but you'd only see it come from the middle or the 0 point if you were in physical proximity to it very, very, very closely. Now, I'm not saying that's what is. It just it seems to go back to everything that we've been discussing this entire time. Ultimately,
right. That's what I was thinking while you were talking. I was just thinking of Jared's question, and I was like, wow, that's really weird because he just asked me a couple days ago.
right, right,
It's all kind of coming together. That's
right.
awesome. I love when that happens. Well, okay, well, thank you. I mean, I don't want to keep you much longer. I do appreciate you taking the time to even do this with me and coming on the show. And again, I'll probably just have this on for my members too at first, and maybe eventually I'll post it on YouTube. But thank you, and thank you for doing everything that you do. I just want to say that. Thank you
Oh,
for things that we don't even know that you do.
I appreciate that. Thank you, and thank you for doing what you're doing, because I think that it's very much needed to see you doing what you're doing, and for others to see what you're doing. And I think it's fantastic, and it's the very, very uplifting. So I want to thank you as equally as much as well. And I think I know it's been a great it's been a great time, and I look forward to coming back.
Oh, well, I'd love to have you back. Thank you. Yes, please. More questions.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You. Ciao for now.